The first time Wei Chung was ashamed of his wife. They had been married for 11 years. They were at a dinner for the Guangzhou Development Consortium, 40 people in a private room at the Mandarin Oriental. The kind of dinner where everyone wore the same careful smile and said the same careful things and watched each other's hands when they reached for the wine. May had worn the blue dress she always wore to important events because it was the only formal dress she owned that still fit well. She had done her own hair. She had ordered the wrong wine, not because she didn't know wine, but because the menu was in French, and she had learned French from a textbook, not from living in France the way the other wives had. And she had looked at Wei when she said it and seen something pass across his face that she had never seen there before. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something quieter and more final than both of those. Contempt. She had finished the dinner with her back straight and her smile in place and her hands steady, because she had spent her entire life learning to finish things she had started, regardless of the pain involved. And she had driven home in silence, and she had lain awake until 3 a.m, listening to Wei breathe next to her and thinking about that look. She did not cry. May had not cried in a very long time. She had learned, in the hard years before Wei, in the village where she grew up, and the factory where she worked at 17, and the city she had come to alone at 19, with 400 yuan, and the specific determination of someone who has decided that their circumstances are not their destiny. She had learned that crying was a thing you did when you had the luxury of stopping. She had never had that luxury. She lay awake until 3 a.m, and then she began to think. This is the story of what she thought about. Subscribe now, because by the time this is over, you will understand why the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone has already dismissed. May had met Wei Chung in 2001, when she was 23 and he was 28, and they were both nobody. He was running a small construction subcontracting company out of a rented office, with 2 employees and a fax machine. She had been working as an administrative assistant for a property developer who had gone bankrupt, and she needed a job, and Wei's company had posted a listing in the window of a noodle shop she passed every morning. She had walked in and asked for the job, and he had given it to her because she was the only applicant who had brought a prepared list of the company's operational inefficiencies that she had identified from the public listings. He had laughed at the list. Then he had read it. Then he had hired her. She became his office manager, then his operations director, then his business partner, then his wife, in that order. The company grew because May understood systems in the specific way that people understand things they have had to figure out from scratch, without shortcuts, without connections, without anyone explaining it to them. She understood contracts and margins and supply chains and the particular psychology of the construction industry, which was an industry built on relationships and therefore on the careful management of who owed what to whom. Wei built the relationships. He was magnetic and charming and had the gift of making every man he met feel like they were the most important person in the room. May built the company. She managed the contracts, caught the errors, tracked the margins, and made sure that when Wei made promises, the infrastructure existed to keep them. By 2010, Wei Chung Construction was worth 400 million yuan. By 2015, it was worth 2 billion. By 2020, Wei Chung had a driver and a personal assistant and an apartment in Shanghai that featured in architecture magazines. And his wife spoke with an accent from a village in Hunan that he had once found charming and now found inconvenient. May noticed the change in him the way you notice a change in weather. Gradually, then all at once. And by the time you fully understand what you're seeing, the storm is already overhead. It started with small things. He began attending events without her, then attending them with explanations. It's a client thing. You'd find it boring, that were clearly not about her finding it boring. Then attending them with a woman named Zhao Li, 27, the daughter of a Shanghai developer, who wore her wealth like a second skin and had never once in her life ordered the wrong wine in a French menu. The first time May saw a photograph of Wei and Zhao Li at an industry gala, not hidden, not cautious, published in a business magazine with a caption that described them as the developer and his associate, she felt something happen in her chest that she had no name for. Not heartbreak exactly. She had grown up too hard for the pure version of heartbreak. Something more complicated. The feeling of a person who has given 20 years of their intelligence and their labor and their loyalty to the building of something, and who has just understood that the thing they built is being used as currency in a transaction they were never consulted about. She sat with the magazine in her hands for a long time. Then she made a phone call. The lawyer's name was Chen Xulan. She was 51 years old and had spent 25 years handling corporate restructuring in Guangzhou and Shanghai. And she was recommended to May by a woman at her Tuesday morning Tai Chi group who said only, "If you ever need someone to make something permanent, call Xulan. She understands how things actually work." They met in a tea house on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2021. May brought a folder of documents. She spread them on the table between them without preamble or drama and said, "I want to understand what I actually own." Sholan looked at the documents. She took her time. She asked questions and wrote things down and drank her tea without any expression that would give away what she was thinking, which was one of the reasons May liked her immediately. At the end of 2 hours, Sholan folded her hands on the table and said, "You own almost nothing." May looked at her. Wei Chung Construction is held by a parent entity, WC Holdings. You are listed as co-founder, but you hold no equity position. Your name appears on the founding documents, but was removed from the shareholding structure in the 2016 restructuring. Sholan paused. "Did you sign the 2016 restructuring documents?" "He asked me to sign a stack of documents," May said. "He said they were routine corporate filings. He was in a hurry. I signed." "You signed yourself out of the company you built," Sholan said, without judgment, simply as a fact. May was quiet for a moment. Outside the tea house, the city moved in its ordinary rhythm. She thought about the factory at 17. She thought about 400 yuan and a bus ticket to the city. She thought about the fax machine in the rented office and the list of operational inefficiencies and the way Wei had laughed and then gone quiet when he read it. She thought about 20 years. "What are my options?" she said. Sholan looked at her for a long moment. "That depends on how patient you are." "I am," May said, "extremely patient." What happened next took 3 years. May did not confront Wei. She did not cry or rage or demand explanations. She went home and continued to be the wife she had always been. Organized, efficient, present, invisible in the specific way that capable women become invisible in rooms where their capabilities are no longer acknowledged. She attended the events he still brought her to. She hosted the dinners. She managed the household with the precision she had always applied to everything. And she learned. She had always been the one who understood the company's structure, the contracts, the liabilities, the relationships. Wei had always relied on her to understand these things so that he didn't have to. This was the thing he had forgotten in his new life, in his new restaurants, and his new events, and his new woman who wore wealth like a second skin. He had stopped thinking of May as someone who understood the company because he had stopped thinking of her as someone who understood anything. He handed her documents to file. She filed them, and she read them first. He asked her to prepare presentations for board meetings. She prepared them, and she understood every number in them. He asked her to liaise with the company's accountants on household financial matters. She liaised, and she built relationships with 2 of the 3 partners over 18 months of careful, consistent, professional interaction. And in 2022, When Wei came home one evening and said he needed her to review a restructuring proposal because he didn't have time and trusted her judgment, she reviewed it, and she called Xulan that night. And together, they spent 6 weeks redesigning the proposal in a way that was entirely consistent with Wei's stated goals, and that also, through a series of entirely legal transactions that Wei had neither the patience nor the attention to trace, resulted in a controlling interest in WC Holdings being transferred to a company called MN Capital Partners. May was the sole director of MN Capital Partners. She had incorporated it in 2021, the Tuesday afternoon she left the tea house. She had named it after herself and after her mother, whose name was Ning, who had worked in the same factory in Hunan until her hands gave out, and who had told May when she left for the city, "You were born with more in your head than most people carry in their whole lives. Don't let anyone take it from you." Wei signed the restructuring proposal on a Thursday evening without reading it, the way he signed most things now, because May had reviewed it, and May always caught the problems. There were no problems. May had made sure of it. The annual shareholders meeting of Wei Chung Construction was held every March at the Grand Hyatt in Guangzhou. It was the most important event on the company's calendar. 40 board members, major shareholders, legal representatives, 3 journalists from industry publications, and the senior partners of the company's 2 principal banks. Wei treated it as a performance, which in some ways it was. He arrived last. He spoke at length. He accepted the applause of people who depended on his decisions and who therefore found his decisions consistently impressive. This year, he had something extra planned. May knew this because Wei had told his assistant to arrange for a second chair at the head table, and the assistant had asked May, still, out of long habit, the person who managed logistics, whether the chair should be placed to Wei's left or his right. May had said left because she knew Wei preferred people of significance to his right, and she had understood immediately that the second chair was not for her. She had smiled and said left and gone back to what she was doing. She had been prepared for this meeting for 4 months. The morning of the shareholders' meeting, May got up at 5:30, which was the time she always got up. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table in the apartment that featured in architecture magazines, and she drank her tea and looked out at the Shanghai skyline in the early morning light, and she felt entirely calm, which was the feeling she had always felt before things that mattered. Her mother had felt it too. She had said, "When everything goes quiet inside, that means you're ready." Everything was quiet. She dressed carefully, not the blue dress. She had bought something new for this occasion, the first new formal dress she had bought in 3 years, because she had been saving the money from the household accounts, small amounts, consistently, the way she did everything. It was dark green, structured, the kind of dress that did not announce itself, but that stayed in the memory. She had her hair done properly for the first time in years. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. She looked like herself. Not the self Wei had been presenting to his world, the village wife, the inconvenient accent, the woman who ordered the wrong wine. The self she had always been underneath that, the one who had read operational inefficiencies off a window listing and walked into a stranger's office with a prepared list. The one who had built something from 400 yuan and a bus ticket and 2 decades of understanding things more deeply than the people who were credited for understanding them. She picked up her bag. Inside it was a single folder. Inside the folder was one document. She went to the meeting. The Grand Hyatt ballroom was arranged the way it always was for this event. Round tables, the company colors, a raised platform at the front with a long head table. 40 people filtering in, finding their seats, the specific sound of important people being important at each other. May took her usual seat at the secondary table, where she always sat, slightly to the left of the platform, which was the seat Wei had implicitly assigned to her through years of seating arrangements that positioned him at the center and her at the margin. She sat down. She placed her bag under her chair. She folded her hands on the table. She waited. Wei arrived at 9:15, which was 15 minutes late, which was the amount of time he had determined communicated authority without being genuinely rude. He was wearing the gray suit he wore when he wanted to be taken seriously. He was accompanied by Zhao Lili, who was wearing a white dress that cost more than May's monthly household budget, and who walked into the room with the confidence of someone who had been told, repeatedly and recently, that she belonged there. Wei took his seat at the head of the table. Zhao Lili sat to his right. May watched several of the board members register this. She watched the two bank partners exchange a glance. She watched the journalists make notes. She watched all of this with the same external calm she had maintained for 3 years, and she felt the quietness inside her that her mother had described, the readiness, the specific clarity that comes before things that cannot be undone. The meeting proceeded through its standard structure: financial review, project updates, the coming year's strategic direction. Wei spoke with the fluency of a man who has said these things many times and believes them absolutely. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. It was, genuinely, one of the things she had loved about him, in the years when she had loved things about him. The way a room came alive when he was performing in it. She had spent 20 years making sure the performance had something true underneath it. At 45 minutes in, Wei paused. He looked around the room with the expression he used for significant announcements, the expression that made people sit forward slightly. "Before we continue," he said, "I have a personal matter I want to address directly, because I believe in transparency with the people who have built this company with me." May's hands remained folded on the table. "My marriage," Wei said, "has run its course. May and I have had a good life together, and I respect her, but we have grown in different directions. The best decision for both of us, and for the company's future, is to move forward separately." He looked at Zhao Lili with the expression of a man presenting something he is proud of. "I am also pleased to tell you that I intend to formalize my relationship with Zhao Lili, whose family connections and business acumen represent exactly the kind of partnership this company needs as we move into the next phase of our growth." The room was quiet for a moment. Then it was not, the specific sound of 40 people recalibrating simultaneously. No one looked at May. This was, she understood, a kindness. They were sparing her the visibility of being looked at in this moment, and she was grateful for it, in the distant way you are grateful for a small mercy inside a large injustice. "I know this is unexpected," Wei said. He was smiling the performance smile, the one that said he was in control of the room. "But I want you to know that the company is stable, our projects are on track, and—" Wei. Her voice was not loud. She had never needed volume to be heard in a room. It was a skill she had developed over 20 years of being the person who understood things and had to make sure the right people understood them too. Wei looked at her. The room looked at her. May reached into her bag. She took out the folder. She opened it, removed the single document, and placed it on the table in front of the chairman of the board, a man named Huang Bofeng, who had been with the company for 12 years, and who, of all the people in this room, was the one she had always respected most for his precision and his integrity. She said, "I think the board should see the current shareholder registry before any further decisions are made." Huang Bofeng looked at the document. He was a careful man, a thorough man. He read it entirely before he responded. May watched him read it and watched the moment he understood what he was reading. A very small change in his expression, almost imperceptible, but May had spent 20 years reading rooms, and she caught it. He placed the document flat on the table. He looked up at Wei. "Wei," he said, and his voice had the particular quality of a man delivering information he would have preferred not to deliver. "It appears the shareholding structure of WC Holdings was updated in the Q3 2022 restructuring. MN Capital Partners currently holds 51% of the parent company." A pause. MN Capital Partners is registered to a director named Mei Ning. The room went absolutely silent. Wei looked at Huang Bofeng. He looked at the document. He looked at May. May looked back at him. Her hands were still folded on the table. Her expression was the same it had been all morning: calm, clear, ready. "The restructuring proposal," Wei said. His voice had lost something. The performance was still there, but the foundation under it had given way, and she could hear it, the specific sound of a man standing on ground that is no longer solid. "You prepared that proposal." "You asked me to," May said. "You said you trusted my judgment." One of the journalists was writing very fast. The two bank partners had leaned together and were speaking quietly. The board members were doing the thing that board members do when they encounter information that changes the shape of everything: looking at each other, reassessing, rebuilding their understanding of the room they were sitting in. Zhao Lili was looking at Wei with an expression that May recognized, because she had worn it herself once, in a different life. It was the expression of a person who has just discovered that the thing they believed they were getting is not the thing on offer. "This isn't—" Wei stopped. He started again. "This isn't what I agreed to." "It is what you signed," May said simply. "Your signature is on page 14. Shulan's office can provide the original if anyone would like to review it." "You—" Wei's voice was losing the last of its performance quality. What was underneath was something rawer and more honest than anything she had seen on his face in years. "You planned this." "I prepared for it," May said. There was a difference, and she thought it was important to say so. "I spent 20 years building something with you. When I understood that you intended to take it and leave, I made sure that the thing we built would stay with the person who built it." She paused. "You told this room tonight that the best decision for both of us is to move forward separately." She looked at him steadily. "I agree." The room was still silent. 40 people, and the only sound was the journalist's pen and the distant ambient noise of the hotel and the very quiet, very complete sound of a man understanding the full shape of what has happened. Wei looked at Zhao Lili. She was looking at her hands. He looked at Huang Bofeng, who met his gaze with the expression of a man who has nothing to offer in this moment except the truth, which was that the document in front of him was real, and the numbers in it were real, and the meeting had just changed direction in a way that could not be changed back. Wei looked at May. She looked at him, and she felt, for the first time in 3 years, something loosen in her chest. Not triumph, not the satisfaction of revenge, which was not what this had ever been about. Something simpler and more necessary. The feeling of a person who has spent a very long time carrying something very heavy and who has just been allowed to set it down. "I'll have the formal divorce filing sent to your lawyers this week," she said. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She looked around the room, at the board members, the bank partners, the journalists, the 40 people who had come to watch Wei Cheng's performance and had watched something else entirely. "Thank you for your time this morning. I look forward to discussing the company's future direction at the next scheduled meeting." She walked toward the door. No one stopped her. No one called after her. The room held its silence in the specific way of rooms that are waiting to be alone before they begin processing what just happened. At the door, she paused. Not to look back. She had no interest in looking back. She paused because the door was heavy, and she took a moment to open it properly. And in that moment, she felt the sunlight from the corridor fall across her face, warm and direct. And she thought about her mother in the factory in Hunan with her ruined hands. And she thought about 400 yuan and a bus ticket and an operational inefficiency list carried into a stranger's office. And she thought about everything those things had become. She opened the door. She walked out. Behind her, the Grand Hyatt Ballroom held 40 people, one document, and the absolute, irreversible silence of a man who had just used his own voice in front of his own board to announce the end of everything he thought he owned. Outside, the Guangzhou morning was bright and ordinary, full of traffic and people going about their lives, and the smell of jasmine from the planters along the hotel entrance. May stood at the top of the steps for a moment and breathed it in. Her phone buzzed. A message from Shulan. "Done?" She typed back, "Done." She walked down the steps into the morning and did not look back at the doors behind her, because the person who had built something from nothing and had it taken and had built it back did not need to look back to know that it was real. It was real. She had made it so. If this story found you, subscribe. And tell me in the comments, have you ever watched someone underestimate the wrong person? Because May is everywhere. We just don't always see her coming.